Hi, and welcome to the test review for Exam 2. Exam 2 will start on April 19th at 7 p.m. That's a Tuesday night. There will be 50 questions in total. The questions will add up to 100 points. Topics from chapters 5, 8, and 9 only. And the true, false, and multiple choice questions will be worth 1 point each, but the calculation problems, which are similar to the homework problems, are now worth 4 or 5 points each. So that is a change from the previous test where they were worth less points. So this test, we have a smaller amount of questions. The last test, I think we had 65 questions. So this test, we're only going to have 50 questions. And the problems will be worth more than the true, false, and multiple choice questions to make sure that the time you spend on them will be worthwhile. The previous test, the problems were worth more, but they were not quite 4 or 5 points each. So here the problems we weighted a little bit more heavily. You'll have less questions and problems overall to do to complete the exam, so the 3-hour time frame should work better. And here you're only covering 3 chapters of material, not 4 chapters. So this exam should be a little less strenuous on time. However, you still have to study for the exam. I did talk to 4 or 5 students who got a perfect score in the last exam, and I said, what did you do? How did you do so well? And they said that they studied their asses off, and they studied like they were taking a test in the classroom. And they prepared spreadsheets for each of the homework questions so they could quickly answer them. And, you know, they really studied hard. So those are good strategies for doing well. The second time around is make sure that you do study hard for the test like it was a final in a classroom, and that you prepare your notes, organize your notes in a way that you can quickly answer questions, and also organize your Excel files so you can quickly answer similar types of homework questions that you've already done for these chapters. So those would be my advice for doing well. Now the topics on the exam, let's go over the topics that are going to be used to make up the true, false, and multiple choice questions, as well as some of the problems. So understanding the concepts of future value and present value. Their calculations for single amounts and the relationship. So what I'm saying here is know what future value is, know what present value is, and know how to make calculations for calculating for single sum amounts. Okay, and know the relationships. What's the relationship between future value and present value? They're the inverse of each other. And why is it important to understand how to calculate this? Secondly, find the future value for present and present value for both ordinary and annuity due problems. So you want to find the this annuity is a series of cash flows. You want to be able to calculate both present value and future value, but understand what they are and why it's important to calculate them. Why do we care about annuities, and what's the difference between an ordinary annuity and an annuity due? Calculate both future value and present value of a mixed stream of cash flows. So these are annuities that they're not equal cash flows, they're mixed streams of cash flows. In fact, we don't really call them annuities because they have a mixed stream of cash flow. Annuity would be an even stream of cash flows. Okay. Determine the procedures. Describe the procedures involved in determining deposits needed to accumulate a future sum or a loan amortization. So these are 2 questions that we did in class, that we talked about in class, that are part of the handouts. And it's, the question would be like, how much do I need to save every year to accumulate $75,000? Or if I took a $60,000 loan, what would be the loan payments each year? Okay. Describe procedures for assessing and measuring risks of a single asset. Those concepts. Understand risk and return characteristics of a portfolio in terms of correlation and diversification. And that's what we talked a lot in Chapter 8 about diversification, correlation, negative correlation, positive correlation. A lot of big questions on that. Review the 2 types of risk. And so the 2 types of risk we're talking about, diversifiable and non-diversifiable, and the role of beta in measuring the relevant risks of for security. Okay, discuss the measure of return and standard deviation for a portfolio and the concept of correlation. So be able to calculate standard deviation for a portfolio. Why would you do that, and why is correlation important in using standard deviation? Understand the basic concepts and sources of capital associated with the cost of capital. Determine the cost of long-term debt. Explain why after-tax cost of debt is the only relevant cost of debt. Determine the cost of preferred stock. Calculate the cost of common equity, convert it into the cost of retained earnings and the cost of new issues. Calculate the weighted average cost of capital, and discuss alternative weighting schemes. Explain what is meant by the marginal cost of capital. Okay, so these, I'm going to stop here and just reiterate. These are the main themes or topics for the majority of the multiple choice and true-false questions. So in the multiple choice and true-false questions, these topics could come up as maybe a simple calculation. So especially for like the present value and future values, they could be actually give you numbers and sort of like a word problem, or they could be asking about the concepts of present value, future value, of risk, of cost of capital, weighted average cost of capital, cost of debt, difference between cost of issuing new debt and cost of using retained earnings. So these are all things that are talked about in my lectures and in reading the chapters, and they could be the basis of true and false or multiple choice questions. Most of the questions will be multiple choice, though. There are not too many true and false this time. Okay. All right, so let's look at the, let me just highlight this. We want to do, what problems do I know specifically you're going to be asked to calculate? So calculation problems include, I want you to be able, and you're going to have to calculate on the exam, the annual compound rate, the future value of an ordinary annuity, the future value of an annuity due, the present value of an ordinary annuity, the present value of annuity due, the present value of a mixed stream of cash flows. You'll be asked to calculate the coefficient of variation, standard deviation, interpreting beta. So one of the problems, you don't have to calculate beta, but you need to interpret beta as far as if a stock has a beta of a 2 and the stock market goes up 10%, how much would this stock likely go up? So if the beta 2 means it goes up twice as fast as the market, so if the market went up 10%, the beta would go up 20%. So that's what I mean by interpreting beta, how a stock's beta will affect its returns relative to the market. Calculate the cost of debt, calculate the cost of preferred stock, calculate the capital asset pricing model, and calculating the weighted average cost of capital. Okay, so those are the questions I'll be asking you specifically to calculate in the fill in the blank problems of the exam. And these are going to be similar to a lot of the homework questions you did. Okay, so just to recap, so we'll be covering 3 chapters on this exam. And the 3 chapters that we're covering, 5, 8, and 9. So chapter 5 is time value money. And I covered the entire chapter of time value money. So basically everything in the time value money chapter can be on the exam. I didn't skip anything in that chapter. I covered everything. I was very thorough. When we go to chapter 8, risk and return, I also covered the entire chapter of risk and return. So you should be very familiar with the concepts of risk, of diversification, of risk preferences, scenario analysis, risk assessment. These are all topics of the chapter, and then we apply that through coefficient of variation, standard deviation, correlation, things of that nature. And we talk about the capital asset pricing model, why that's effective, how it's a measure of risk, the security market line, beta coefficient. So all these topics from chapter 8, risk and return, will be covered pretty thoroughly as well. And then we get to chapter 9, the last chapter covered on this exam, and that's the cost of capital chapter. So in the cost of capital chapter, we're looking at the basic concept of why we calculate cost of capital, and we talk about the cost of long-term debt and why tax matters, the after-tax cost of that matters. And we talked about after-tax cost of debt, calculating the cost of preferred stock, calculating the cost of new stock, looking at the constant growth model for calculating, for using to calculate the cost of capital. Again, capital asset pricing model talked about in this chapter. Cost of retained earnings, cost of issuing new stock, and of course calculating weighted average cost of capital. These are all topics from Chapter 9 that will be talked about, and I do cover Chapter 9 completely as well. So for these 3 chapters, 5, 8, 9, you are responsible for everything in these 3 chapters. I didn't skip anything, or I'm not excluding anything on the exam. This list of topics, these are the main topics that I listed and spelled out before here that you should definitely 100% know, because these topics are 100% going to be on the exam. This list of main topics does not mean it includes everything on the exam, but this is probably at least 80 to 90%, this list of topics, of material that the exam is going to talk about and cover. So you need to understand that. And the best way to do that is to read the chapter for the first time for many of you, or reread the chapter and take notes and trying to organize, extract the information for the chapter and some sort of system of notes where you can easily get to the information you need when you're taking the test. So that way, especially if you have an online book, you don't have to flip around the online book as much. And also redoing the homework problems, as far as you can review your results on the homework problems. And you can even, make a little spreadsheet examples of the homework problems so you could quickly calculate something similar. Strategies like this to help you propel you quicker through the exam so you don't run out of time. And, don't treat this exam as an open book exam where you can just teach yourself what you need to know in time for the test or during the test. You really need to know this material before the test starts. And, you shouldn't really even be referring to the book that much. And if you find yourself on a multiple choice question and you're reading passages of the book and you're trying to figure out the answer, that means you haven't studied properly. Most of the questions in this test you should know pretty well, can answer immediately without having to look anything up. That's how you know you prepared well. Don't be lured into a false sense of security that you have the ability to look at the book and know all the formulas, because that's only a part of the battle. You really have to be able to interpret. So that's why on these topics I say interpret the relationship between present value and future value. Describe the procedures in determining deposits needed to accumulate a future sum, because you may know how to calculate that, but do you understand the procedure as far as the information you need and what you're trying to do? So when I say understand risk and return characteristics, that's not calculating anything. It's really understanding the contents of that chapter. So in preparing for this exam, it wouldn't be unusual for students to re-listen to my lectures, reread the chapters, and redo the homeworks to get yourself as familiar as possible with the material to do well. So I hope that this review for the exam 2 helps you to understand what the contents of what makes up this exam, some strategies and how you can do better on this exam. And I have a confident feeling that you've learned a lot from the first exam, and your scores and your performance in this exam should be greatly improved. And I have good confidence in you to do that. So good luck, and I wish you the best. Take care.